The key to my grandfather's locked chest was buried inside the wall of my father's workshop, and when I found it, I realized my family had been lying to me for years. I was 38, struggling to keep our farm alive after 2 terrible harvests. One cold morning, while repairing an old plow, I noticed a loose board. Behind it sat a tiny brass key wrapped in cloth. The initials on it were my grandfather's, RM. I almost threw it away. Instead, I drove to the back field and dug near the old oak where Dad said Grandpa once stored tools. My shovel hit metal. My heart started pounding. I uncovered a rusted chest, locked it, and carried it home. Before I tell you what was inside, if stories about family secrets and betrayal keep you watching, subscribe to Family Betrayal. And just so you know, the faces, photos, backgrounds, and scenes shown here are visual recreations meant only to help imagine the story. I opened the chest that night. There were 12 letters, all written by Grandpa. The first one mentioned my father. The second mentioned money. By the third, my hands were shaking. Grandpa had discovered that someone in the family had been secretly selling pieces of our land. But he had never exposed them. He had hidden the proof instead. I kept reading until one sentence stopped me cold. If they ever find this chest, they will know why I stayed silent. Why would a man protect the person destroying everything he built? I knew then the chest held more than paper and secrets. The next morning, I took the letters to the farmhouse kitchen and read them again. Grandpa had written about a loan taken against the property decades earlier. He said my father had signed papers he didn't fully understand, trusting his older brother, my Uncle Ray. According to Grandpa, Ray promised to repay the debt, but instead transferred part of the farm into a company under his control. The shocking part was that Dad eventually discovered it. Grandpa wrote that Dad wanted to fight, but Ray threatened to reveal an old family secret that could ruin him. I stared at that line for nearly 10 minutes. What secret could make my father surrender land that had belonged to our family for generations? I called Dad. He answered, but when I mentioned Grandpa's letters, there was a long silence. Then he said, "Son, put everything back where you found it." That was all. No explanation. No anger. Just fear. I knew then that the chest was only the beginning. I confronted Uncle Ray at his office. He laughed when I mentioned the documents, saying Grandpa had been confused in his final years. But when I placed one letter on his desk, his face changed. He grabbed it and whispered, "Where did you get this?" That reaction told me more than any confession could. I left without arguing. On the drive home, another thought hit me. If Ray was scared of the letters, someone else must have known about them too. I found fresh tire tracks beside the old oak tree. Someone had already been searching. I barely slept. The next afternoon, I checked the chest again and discovered a false bottom I had missed. Under it was a deed and a small photograph of my father standing beside Grandpa and Ray. On the back, Grandpa had written a date and 4 words, the day Dad confessed. I felt sick. I drove to the county records office and searched the property history. There it was. A transfer had been filed years before, but the signature used for my grandfather's approval looked wrong. I compared it with the letters. The handwriting was completely different. Someone had forged his name. Then I found something worse. The land wasn't sold to Ray. It had been transferred to a shell company, and the company was now tied to the developer trying to buy our remaining acreage. I suddenly understood why Ray had been pushing me to sell. He wasn't trying to save the farm. He was trying to finish what he started. I confronted Dad again. This time he broke down. He admitted he had known about the forged transfer for years. Grandpa had asked him to stay quiet because Ray had threatened the family, but Dad had carried the guilt ever since. Then Dad handed me an envelope he had hidden since Grandpa's funeral. Inside was the final letter. Grandpa wrote that he had left the chest for me, not Dad, because he believed I would be strong enough to expose the truth. At the bottom was one last sentence. "Do not let my silence become your inheritance." I cried when I read it. I knew what I had to do. I gasped. I took every letter, deed, photograph, and record to an attorney. We challenged the fraudulent transfer, and the investigation uncovered years of hidden transactions. Ray finally admitted he had forged the documents, but the biggest surprise came when the developer backed away after learning the land was under legal review. We saved the farm, not because I was clever, but because Grandpa had refused to let the truth disappear forever. Dad apologized to me in the barn. He said he was sorry for protecting the wrong person and for making me inherit a secret I never asked for. I hugged him. But I also told him something I wish someone had told him years earlier. Protecting family does not mean protecting their lives. Ray lost control of the company and faced the consequences of what he had done. Months later, our first harvest in years came in. I stood in the same field where I had found the chest and realized the harvest was never the real treasure. It was the truth buried underneath it. If you were in my place, would you have exposed your own family, even if it meant breaking years of silence? Tell me what you would have done in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that family loyalty should never require you to betray your own conscience. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe to Family Betrayal. Sometimes the hardest truth to uncover is the one that finally sets a family free. And that is the lesson I carry with me every time I walk those fields.